Juasa Temple, once located west of Engjabong Peak in Yeoju, Gyeonggi-do Province. This is where the progressive literati of the moderate Namin faction gathered in the late 18th century for scholarly research. On the opposite side of Engjabong Peak, across from Juasa Temple, was Cheonjinam Temple, also a place where education and studies took place. These two places are known as the home of the Korean Catholic Church because it is where the scholars of late Joseon who sought a new ideology began studies in Sohak, a study on Catholicism and Western ideas. Those who participated in these lectures in 1779 were part of the Namin faction politically and affiliated to the Songho School academically. Kwon Chul-shin and at least 6 others of high repute were among these scholars. Originally, the purpose of the group was to study Confucianism. But Lee Byuk, a late attendee, brought a book on Catholicism published in China, and thus the nature of the lectures changed.
이보기들.
어서 오시게. 어서 오시게.
이것 좀 보게나. 내가 며칠 전부터 읽던 책인데 우리가 찾던 참 세상의 모습이 제시되어 있네.
천주 시리. 이건
Heated discussions were held among the scholars over the ideas written in the Western book. As a result, some among them came to accept Western ideas and philosophies, and Lee Byuk was the one who absorbed the most.
광암 이벽 선생은 유교 바탕에 완전히 전혀 다른 세계에서 어떤 책을 통해서 그게 사실 궁금한데요. 그 새로운 가르침에 대한 그 환희, 그 감동을 찾아낸 분이시죠. 그래서 이제 뭐 천지남, 주어사, 강학회에 가서 공부하고 있는 분들에게 사실은 이 감동을, 그러니까 그분들도 책을 읽은 분들이죠. 근데 그 감동으로 세계로 들어오게 했고 당대에 한다 하는 유학자들을 다 설득을 시켰다는 거죠.
So then why was Lee Byuk and the leading scholars of the time so fascinated with Western ideas? The intellectuals who lived during the turbulent times of the late Joseon period discovered new ideas that could lead to reform through Western books written in Chinese, such as the De Dio Verax Disputatio, which claimed that Catholicism could remedy the shortcomings of Confucianism.
사회 변동에 대한 갈구, 그리고 그 사회 공동의식을 느끼는데 뭐 실학이 일어나고 그런 여러 가지 개혁이 있었고요. 또 불안한 사람들로서는 무슨 정감록이나 이런 사상을 찾고자 하는 사람들도 있었습니다. 근데 이제 그렇기 때문에 젊고 고뇌하고 진리를 찾는 사람은 아마 많은 책을 읽었을 거예요. 그런데 여기서 무엇을 봤냐? 인간이 얼마나 존엄한 존재인지를 깨달았다는 거죠. 주교요지에 그런 얘기가 나옵니다. 어떤 사람이 임금님의 배우자가 되면 그 사람이 임금님처럼 귀해지지 않습니까? 우리가 천주님을 섬기면 그렇게 귀해집니다라고 하는 이야기를 그 당대 사람이잖아요. 이야기하고 있는 것. 그 다음에 이제 또 하나는 사랑받고 있다라는 것일 겁니다. 광암 선생이 직접 설명한 적은 없는데 그 뒤에 많은 사람들이 체포되어서 대답하는 소리에서 그 2가지가 아니었는가 그렇게 생각을 해봅니다.
Immersed in these studies, Lee Byuk asks Lee Seung-hun, who was on his way to Beijing to meet with missionaries and bring back books.
광암, 계시오. 어서 오시게. 내 기다리고 있었네. 이리 앉으시게.
During his visit to Beijing with envoys, Lee Seung-hun met with Jesuit priests, learned their catechism, and became the first Korean to be baptized. He also brought back a crucifix, holy pictures, along with other sacred objects and books on doctrine. Ebyok studied these books in depth and finally became a believer of the Catholic Church. Eager to spread the word about the truth he had learned, he begins to proclaim the gospel.
This is the right way and the true way. The Lord Almighty has compassion for the people of this country and wants us to have them participate in the redeeming grace of His salvation. We must spread Catholicism and preach the gospel to everyone.
In Catholicism, there was no discrimination between men and women, nor between classes or rank. All people were equal. It taught the way to everlasting life even after death, as well as clear and specific actions to become a person of virtue. Ebyok became a believer and accepted Catholicism as truth. He spread his faith to his good friends and fellow scholars, Chung Yak-yong and Kwan Chol-shin, as well as to relatives and peers in the middle class. Then in 1784, he was baptized at his home near Supyeogyo Bridge in Seoul by Lee Seung-hun, and thus began a true community of faith.
성령의 이름으로 그대에게 세례를 줍니다.
그리스도교 신앙 공동체는 세례로 결속이 된 신자들 간의 공동체일 때 교회라고 부르게 됩니다. 이승훈이 혼자서 세례를 받았다고 하면은 그것은 공동체가 될 수 없고 어디까지나 개인적인 사건이었겠죠. 그런데 이승훈은 세례를 받고 돌아온 그 해 9월경에 이 수표교 부근에 있었던 이벽의 집에서 이벽에게 세례를 줍니다. 그럼으로써 그리스도교 신앙 공동체가 이루어졌기 때문에 바로 이벽의 세례에서 우리는 그리스도교 신앙 공동체의 출범을 보게 되는 것입니다.
Once this Christian community emerged, the Catholic faith spread across the country.
자, 오늘은 특별히 우리 조선의 핍박받는 백성들과 그리고 굶어 죽는 사람들을 위하여 기도합니다.
In the spring of the year 1785, Lee Seung-hun, Ebyok, Kwan Il-shin, and others who had gathered at Kim Pom-woo's house in Myeongnebang, Seoul, for a prayer meeting were arrested by the government officials who were on patrol, which led to the Eul-ah prosecution incident.
이보게, 지금 뭐 하는 건가?
아니 대낮에 지금 노름하는 게 아닌가 저거?
이런
아니 지금 이게 못들하는 짓들이오. 이놈들이 뭔 상관이더냐?
노름을 단속하란 국법이 지엄합니다. 아무리 양반들이어도 이러시면 저희가 모실 수밖에 없죠.
노름이라니 그런 것이 아니네. 일단 포청으로 가셔서 말씀하시지요.
Seeing a religious meeting for the first time, officials of the Ministry of Justice were shocked at the strange sight and arrested the people immediately. However, at the time, the Ministry of Justice did not have jurisdiction over the gentry, and they had no choice but to release most of them. Only Kim Pom-woo, the host and a middle-class interpreter, was tortured and later sentenced to exile. Even in exile, Kim Pom-woo continued to pray and spread the gospel. But the wounds of the severe beatings he took worsened, and was the first to die in the Korean Catholic Church for his faith.
아이고 도련님, 댕겨 오셨슈.
내 그리 일렀거늘 사기에 빠져 또 모임을 하고 왔느냐?
아버님.
Due to the Eul-ah prosecution incident, the royal court became aware of the dangers of the Catholic Church, and families of the gentry began to warn their children off. Even Ebyuk, the founding member of the church, was pressured by his father to renounce his faith.
그 짓을 그만둘 결심이 들 때까지 다시 나올 생각만 해라.
Ebyuk was placed under house arrest and eventually died. Despite the prosecution incident, the early church became more organized and the numbers of believers continued to increase. Leaders among the laymen performed religious ceremonies such as Mass and sacrament through a laity-based hierarch, following the example of Confucian rites. However, many questions arose while studying catechism, so they sent a secret envoy to the bishop in Beijing.
In 1790, the Choson Church asked me whether they could make ancestral tablets for their ancestors or keep the ones that were already made. In accordance with a clear decision by the Curia, my answer to this question was negative.
초기 교회 대부분의 양반 신자들은 천주교 교리와 유교 교리가 서로 상충되는 것이 아니라 서로 보완해준다는 보유론적인 입장으로 인식하고 있었습니다. 그런데 구베아주교의 회신은 그러한 인식 자체를 전면적으로 부정하게 만들어버렸습니다. 이제 조선교회는 새로운 국면을 맞이하게 됩니다. 그러니까 조상제사 금령을 따르느냐 거부하느냐에 따라서 교회에 남느냐 교회를 멀리하느냐 결정되기에 이릅니다. 그러니까 양반 신분의 특권을 포기를 하거나 아니면 반체제적이거나 반유교적인 생활을 했던 사람이거나 그 다음에 천주교를 통해서 이상사회를 구현하기 바랬던 사람이거나 제사 의무와는 무관한 어떤 신분의 어떤 그런 신자들 같은 경우에는 교회에 남게 되는 반면에 천주교를 그러니까 주작의 가치체계를 보완해주는 학문으로 받아들인 사람이거나 아니면 현직 관료 내지는 정치지향적인 인물들 같은 경우에는 교회를 멀리하게 됩니다. 그러니까 즉 구베아주교의 회신은 조선의 천주교 신자들 가운데 양반층의 대거 이탈을 불러오게 되면서 신자층이 중인으로 변화하게 되는 계기가 됩니다.
While confusion arose over the prohibition of ancestral rites, Yoon Ji-chung, a gentry, became the center of controversy in Jinsan. In the summer of 1791, Yoon Ji-chung's mother died, and after discussing the matter with his relative, Kwon Sang-yeon, they decided the funeral would be conducted based on his mother's will and the church's instructions. But they would not enshrine an ancestral tablet. When this became known, Hong Nagan and the Namen faction, who led the persecution against the Catholic Church, wrote an appeal to the royal court.
It was not enough that Yoon Ji-chung and his group abolished ancestral rites, but now he refuses to enshrine an ancestral tablet for his mother, nor does he receive callers for the funeral. How can such misdeed and evil be allowed to happen?
The Noron faction, rivals of the Namen faction, called Catholics an immoral group who threatened the Confucian social order and demanded that strong punitive action be taken against them. In the end, Yoon Ji-chung and Kwon Sang-yeon became the first martyrs, killed after severe punishment. Because of the negativity over the prohibition of ancestral rites, the Choson Church was weakened. It was at this time that a priest from China, Chumun-mo, was sent to Choson. He was the first missionary to the Choson Church, which had been without a priest so far. Having a priest for the first time, the Choson Church soon stabilized and expanded into the areas of Gyeonggi-do, Chungcheong-do, and Cholla-do, with a number of believers reaching around 10,000. A laity organization was also formed to support their only priest. Choi Chang-hyun became the president and systemized the church organization, which oversaw the regional presidents. Myeongdohae, also a laity group, was formed at this time, and its first president, Chung Yak-jong, wrote the first easy-to-read Korean catechism, Chugyo-yoji, which was well read among church members. The women of Chosun who had no voice in the patriarchal and feudal society were also newly awakened. These women realized that they were noble and equal in the eyes of the Lord and loved by Him. They grew to be leaders in the church. Kang Wan-suk and Yoon Chum-hae were appointed to be president and actively engaged in spreading the gospel. Catholic believers considered each other to be brothers and sisters in Christ, and thus treated people equally regardless of class or rank. They put this into practice in their everyday lives. Some believers who became devoted eventually set their slaves at home free.
이것을 없애려고 한다는 말을 하기 위함이니라. 나는 오늘부터 천주님의 가르침대로 너희들을 나와 같은 평등한 존재, 즉 누구의 소유도 아닌 그런 존재로 만들고자 한다. 자, 개똥이 아범.
The liberation of slaves by Catholics Hong Nagmin and Yu Kunmyung occurred 100 years before the official liberation of slaves in Joseon during the Gaba Reform in 1894. This was one extraordinary aspect of the Catholic belief.
자, 우리 마지막으로 막길동이.
천주교 신앙은 단순한 하나의 종교적인 복음으로서의 기능만 했던 건 아닙니다. 분명히 그건 많은 사람들에게 새로운 삶의 방향을 제시를 해주는 신앙이었습니다. 예를 들자면은 황일광과 같은 보령 출신의 백정이 있는데 이 황일광은 세례를 받은 다음에 자신에게는 천국이 두 개가 있다고 이야기를 합니다. 하나의 천국은 자신의 신분이 백정임을 잘 알면서도 신자들이 자신을 교우, 즉 믿음의 벗 아닙니까? 믿음의 벗으로 삼아주고 동등하게 대우를 해주는데 감격을 해서 세례를 받은 다음에 지상 천국을 누리고 있다고 했습니다. 두 번째 갈 천국은 그의 사후의 천국이 되겠죠. 이렇게 황일광의 경우에는 바로 천주교 신앙을 갖는다는 것 자체가 일종의 사회적으로 자신의 신분 해방을 느끼게 하는 계기가 됩니다. 그래서 그에게 있어서 복음은 소셜 가스펠로서의 역할, 사회적 복음으로서의 역할을 했다고 생각이 됩니다. 이렇게 천주교 신앙은 초기에 분명히 이 세상의 질서를 바꾸고 하느님이 원하는 평등한 인간의 질서로 가다듬어 보려고 하는 노력들을 집중적으로 전개하고 있었습니다.
Joseon had a strict class system based on the foundation of Confucianism. Neo-Confucianism was Joseon's founding principle in religion. It was central to protecting royal authority and maintaining social order. But in the late 18th century, royal authority weakened because of potentates other than the king wielding too much power. The national economy tumbled. While the leading class was engaged in political dispute, each for their own cause, the people's lives fell into despair, and the social system centered around nobles began to slowly fail.
내가 어찌 개 되지만도 못한 너와 함께 이 땅을 밟아야 하느냐 이 말이다.
Even so, the tyranny by the leading class worsened. It was at this time Catholicism appeared. Since Catholics chose to serve God instead of their king or parents, and preached that all people were created equal, it was a disturbing idea that threatened the rights of nobles. The leading class became extremely uneasy.
조선 사회는 성리학을 받들던 사회였습니다. 성리학은 조선의 정치, 종교, 교육을 뒷받침하는 단단한 축이었습니다. 복음이 전해졌을 당시에는 주자의 학설에 의의를 제기하는 경우 유학일지라도 사문난적으로 지목되어 배척을 받게 됩니다. 그만큼 당시의 조선 사회는 사상적으로 매우 경직된 그런 사회였습니다. 이런 상황에서 몇몇 지식인들은 사회 개혁을 위한 새로운 사상을 모색하게 됩니다. 그 가운데 하나가 바로 천주교 신앙이었습니다. 천주교에서는 모든 사람은 하느님의 자녀이므로 형제처럼 지내야 된다는 가르침 아래 신분적 차별을 두지 않았습니다. 그리고 당시의 사회적 풍습과는 달리 남성과 여성, 남편과 아내 간의 상하수직적인 관계가 아니라 수평적인 관계를 가져야 된다고 그렇게 가르쳤습니다. 이러한 천주교 신앙은 당시의 성리학적 가치를 정면으로 위배하는 것이었고 기존 체제에 대한 거부이기도 했습니다. 그래서 당시의 집권층에서는 천주교 신자들을 무부무분, 즉 임금도 모르고 아비도 모르는 무리라고 비난을 했습니다. 집권층은 성리학적 가치를 보존하고 그들의 정치적 권리를 유지하기 위해서 천주교를 강하게 탄압했던 것입니다.
Persecution was harsh. After King Jeongjo, who had been moderate toward Catholics, died, and Queen Jeongsun became regent in the first year of King Sunjo, the Pyeokpa faction came into power and used Catholicism to fulfill their long-cherished wish to remove their rivals, the Namin and Shipa faction. Thus, persecution began in earnest. Over a period of 1 year, over 300 believers were systematically killed by using a joint liability system, and those who were arrested were sentenced to death by flogging, beheading, or dismemberment. Unable to stand by and watch his congregation go through such suffering, the only priest, Father Jumun Mo, turned himself in, only to be beheaded at Senamdo. Despite all the torture and placation, many believers did not waver in their faith. They readily chose the path of martyrdom in order to keep their faith to God and considered it to be an honor as a faithful servant. In the aftermath of such persecution in 1791, most of the leaders in the church were killed. President Chae Chang-hyun, Jong Yak-jong, who had led the Myeongdohae, as well as Lee Jong-chang, Yu Hangum, and the female believers, Kang Wan-suk, and Lee Suni all died as martyrs. Those who survived scattered across the country and formed small communities. After the persecution, the believers in this area, which had been the center of mission since the very beginning, moved to the provinces of Gyeongsang-do and Gangwon-do. They secretly led their lives of faith, slowly rebuilding the church. They earned a living by slash and burn farming, or by making earthen pots in the mountains. Without any social discrimination, those who were better off took in the poorest family, and also took care of orphans, widows, widowers, and the elderly. Where did they get such strength to keep their faith despite their poor and weary lives?
박해를 피한 신자들은 신앙생활을 위해서 고향을 떠날 수밖에 없었습니다. 그들은 각 지역을 유랑하다가 정착하게 되는데 그 정착한 지역은 대개 외진 산간 지역이었습니다. 그들은 그 산간 지역에서 어려운 생활을 하면서도 신앙 공동체를 형성해 나갔는데 그것이 우리가 알고 있는 바로 교우촌이었습니다. 교우촌에서는 회장을 중심으로 일상생활과 신앙생활이 유지되어 갔습니다. 이들이 이제 다시 신앙생활을 시작하게 되면서 자신들만의 구원만이 아니라 이웃에게 복음을 전파하기 위해서 많은 노력을 합니다. 그 결과 천주교 신자들은 점차 늘어나게 되고 박해로 힘든 시간을 겪었던 한국 천주교회는 다시 일어날 수 있는 그러한 발판을 마련하게 됩니다.
I was greatly impressed by the cooperative spirit of the new believers. The greatest virtue is to show love and kindness. They may be lacking in wealth in this life, but they share what little they have with each other, regardless of class. Looking around, it almost feels as if I am in the early Christian church. In Acts, the believers give everything they have to the apostles and wish for nothing in this world except to share the honest living of Jesus Christ and brotherly love.
One day I encountered the love of God. His love awakened me, making me realize how precious I am, and that my neighbors are all children of God, making them my brothers and sisters. Nothing can be better than this in the world. They lived a life of devotion, following the truth they came to believe, and did not submit to the threat of death. Our ancestors in faith lived honorable and equal lives, the lives they dreamed of from wherever they were living. The light they shined upon the world by casting away the comforts of life and courageously rising up has brought a new dawn to the Korean Catholic Church.